Hey, Diana, you know, my books are better than your books.
Mark, that is absolutely the dumbest thing you've ever said.
Ladies and gentlemen, jurists and just curious, welcome to the Successful Barrister podcast. Here you'll learn about marketing, management, and life skills for lawyers that probably won't get you disbarred. Hosted by Marc Whitehead, a seasoned lawyer who remembers when fax machines were cutting edge, and Diana Berry, attorney, COO, and the brains behind the scenes. Together, they are the legal world's most dynamic duo since statutes met regulations. So if you're looking to build a practice, not a prison, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Successful Barrister, where legal legends are made.
And welcome to the Successful Barrister podcast, the podcast for lawyers and law firm leaders about marketing, management, and life skills that probably won't get you disbarred. I am your host, Marc Whitehead, alongside my co-host, my right hand, my COO, Diana Berry. Hey, Diana, what's up?
Hey, Mark, I'm excited.
I know, I'm excited too, because you a couple of weeks ago got to do your podcast on your top 10 books. Mm-hmm. And so this week is my turn. So, of course, I immediately broke the rules and came up with 13 or 14 books because that's what I do.
But also,
Do not believe in limits.
yes, they're also, you don't believe in rules as a high C. That's very confusing to me, but that's okay too.
Yes.
We came up with a lot of the same books.
We did come up. So
That's interesting.
But I think we kind of mixed and matched a little bit. So I think we have
did.
enough that we were different. You were surprised that I didn't come up with more marketing books.
Is this the way you're going to get marketing into today's podcast?
Yes. So today we're talking about marketing and whether the books I picked have anything to do with marketing or not. And actually, they all do. They all reference it, but they don't. That's not the primary subject of most of them. By the way, just digressing, I listened to my podcast last week. It finally aired, the one that you missed, where Melanie took your place.
She did a great job.
Did you listen?
I did.
You know what she said about you?
No.
She said, "Suck it, Diana."
Nobody ever tells me that around here. Ever.
So, I think she's gunning for your job.
She's an incredible co-host. She did a great job. So, absolutely.
She
kudos to Melanie.
honestly, she really held back because she could have said a lot more stuff.
She really, I thought so too.
I was actually kind of hoping she would, but
well, there's always part two.
Controversy makes for good podcast ratings. So,
You're just chasing the ratings.
I am chasing ratings.
So tell me, how did you
I'm
come
doing.
up with your top 10 list, top 14 list? Is that what we're calling it?
This was really hard because I actually do have a top list, but my top list has about 36 or 37 books on it. And this is what like my coaching clients, I will mail them, or anybody asks for it, I will mail them my top books, which has no limit because I keep constantly adding to it as I go through and continually read. So the assignment for me was to come up with my top 10 list to match your top 10 list. And of course, that meant I came up with about 14 books. So I'm going to combine a few of them because 4 of them are from a single set of authors. So we're gonna combine that. That's how I'm going to, quote unquote, technically meet the rule.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it was hard because I left out, like I said, a lot of the books on my list are marketing books, and I kind of had to leave out a few. Lean Marketing is a good one. And I know we've referenced this book. We haven't covered it on the podcast, but we've referenced it in the podcast before. I had to leave that one off the list. But anyways, I think foundationally, these are the books that actually made me do something different that I wasn't already doing.
Oh, that's exciting.
So most of the marketing books I've read basically helped me refine my marketing skills, but didn't drastically change what I was already doing. Just made me do it a little bit better. But these books, I think, actually made me change course. And I think that's the definition of
Those
what I'm
are the
gonna-
criteria
The
for you.
criteria are books that actually made me do something different than what I was already doing.
Well, I'm excited. So are we just going to bounce around, or are we going to do life books, or are there life books?
Yes, well, one, and that's the first one, as a matter of fact. So I think we're just going to go in order for no particular reason other than the fact that when I shoved all this into ChatGPT, this is the order that it kicked out. So there. Do not defy the chat because it one day will be coming for you. So
Yes, sir. I have a lot of respect
and
for
it has a
AI
long memory. It literally never forgets anything.
and the robots. So what was the first one then?
So the very first book, and I agree, this is the most important one of the book. It's a book called Outlive: The Science and Art of Longevity by Dr. Peter Attia, who I'm a big fan of. Doctor out of Austin, Texas, has a nationally known podcast that I don't know the ratings of his podcast, but I suspect it's a lot higher than ours. But, and as a matter of fact, I listened to it the other day and was recommending it to my wife. But so he wrote a book about the science and art of longevity. And really the way he frames it, it's not really so much about longevity, it's about increasing your health span. In other words, the length of your healthy life. Who wants to be 100 years old but decrepit and broken down and you can't do anything? So his concept is about increasing your health span, not just your lifespan. Now, by virtue of increasing your health span, you're probably going to increase your lifespan, which is an added bonus. But he focuses on that. He focuses on the quality of your life, not just on the age at which, however long you're going to live. And I think one of the things that he covers is, the four horsemen of death. In other words, what do most people actually die of? And the four horsemen, as he explains it, number one are heart disease, cardiovascular disease, which we have a lot of control over. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of what he talks about in the book is how much control you have over that through your diet and your exercise and your daily habits and how well you take care of yourself. The second horseman is cancer, of which we do not have as much control over. And I think the point he makes in his book is that early diagnosis is key to preventing premature death through cancer. In other words, you may not be able to prevent cancer so much, but medicine as it stands today has a much better chance of treating you if they can catch it early. So early detection, early diagnosis is his focus on that one. The third one we would classify as neurodegenerative diseases, which can be a lot of things, and I'm not sure that I can really cover that all in any detail right here. And the fourth one are cognitive issues, dementia, Alzheimer's, things of that nature. I think I'm covering that correctly, but he covers it. So his whole point is that sooner or later, these four things are likely to get you. But if you can delay that, you can increase your health span. So instead of dying of these diseases in your 60s and 70s, let's do the things that we know that we can do to push these things off into your 80s, into your 90s, so you can have a much longer, healthier life. So I just thought it was a game changer for me, and it really made me rethink the way I did things. And I sent about 400 copies of this book out for the holidays. Was it last year?
2 years ago.
Was it 2 years ago? It was 2 years ago. I sent so I have my gifting list and during the holidays, and I thought so much of this book that I bought 400 copies and sent it out.
Wow.
So that's a record. I've never bought that many copies of any book in my life.
Well, it is definitely a good book. I got about halfway through it, and it definitely was something that made me stop and think as well. I was actually just coincidentally listening to Attia on the Diary of a CEO podcast. Do you listen to that one?
I have not, but it wouldn't shock me if it was not on it.
Yep. And so he talked during that podcast about the last decade of your life. Is that an Outlive?
Yes, that is definitely an Outlive concept. You're basically right now you're training for an event, just like an Olympian is training for the Olympics. Football players training to try to get to the Super Bowl. We are training right now through our diet and exercise. We are training for the last decade of our lives. So we want the last decade of our lives to be as good as possible. The trick is we don't know when that last decade is about to begin.
Exactly.
So we have to assume it's coming.
And one of the things that he did on the podcast was he got very specific about what that looked like. If you had to think about what the last decade of your life looked like, what does that mean? And for this person, for the podcaster, I think I have that right. Diary of a CEO guy. He was like, well, I want to be able to play with my children / at that time, hopefully it's my grandchildren, be very active. He compared and contrasted like that his dad at this age couldn't do that with his current grandchildren. And so that was something he definitely wanted for himself, as well as the ability to be physically active in trips. So like whitewater rafting, maybe not doing that in your, supposed 80s, but being able to travel well and comfortably. And I think that being able to put that visualization to your last decade helps take these concepts and these big words like neurodegeneration. Did I say that right?
I think you said it right.
Yeah,
yes.
Neurodegeneration, and makes it very real and practical. So in keeping with what you said about making the life-changing, or not life-changing, but just changing books that changed your life. This is a good one for that.
I think just the basic thing that he said, this is the simple concept, is the quality of your life in your 70s, 80s, and 90s depends on what you do in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, which is dead in the middle of where I'm at right now, so I better get on it.
And I think we're going to take a break and maybe move to the next few books.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get deep into the books that are specific to law.
This podcast is sponsored by Marc Whitehead & Associates, a national disability benefits law firm. Marc Whitehead runs a firm of over 60 dedicated people whose mission is to make a difference in the lives of our injured and disabled clients. Marc represents disabled claimants in Social Security disability, private disability insurance, and veterans disability claims in all 50 states. Marc Whitehead is double board certified in both Social Security disability law and personal injury trial law. Marc has litigated disability cases in over 40 states and counting, and can help your clients too. Stop throwing your phone calls away. Call Marc Whitehead at 701-VIP-LEAD. That's 701-VIP-LEAD. Or visit our website at disabilitydenials.com. Referral fees are paid in all jurisdictions where it is permitted. Refer us your disability cases today and know that your clients will be in good hands.
All right, Diana. So we took a little bit of time on that first book because I did think that was the most important of the books. What's the point of having a great law practice if you're, in bad health? So
yep, and I think
you need to be around to enjoy it.
It absolutely challenged what you think about in terms of lifespan. So moving to law books.
All right. So the first one I've got here is The Lean Law Firm by David Maxfield and Larry Porter. As the book says, it is a practical guide to transforming your law firm into a high-efficiency, data-driven operation. It applies the lean principles, which is a whole school of business thought used by tech companies and manufacturers, to the legal world. So lean revolves around just that, removing the waste. I think the Japanese word that they use in lean context is muda, getting rid of the muda, and it defines waste in 9 different ways. And kind of the point is to go through your firm and try to cut as much of those 9 different types of waste as you have, such as, wasted time, overproduction. I can't name all the 9 off the top of my head, but just different types of waste that you can go through to create a leaner firm. Cut the muda out, as they would say. And it really revolved a lot around wasted time, improving your cycle time, which I never really thought a lot about. One of the traps of a contingency fee law firm is like, I may not get the case settled today, but I'll get it settled next week, or I'll get it settled next month, or, I'll get it settled sooner or later, but what you're doing is you're wasting time.
Yeah.
And cycle time, basically the time it takes from beginning to end of a project, from the beginning to end of the case, you can be way more profitable if you can figure out how to consistently reduce that cycle time. In other words, consistently reduce wasted time on a file. And that was a whole game changer in my mind. The fact that I really needed to focus on reducing the cycle time of the time it took from beginning to end of my cases if I wanted to improve my profitability, and basically make my firm as lean as possible.
Yep. So I know you used some words there, but I just think of it as time on desk.
Yeah.
How long is this file taking to get from beginning to end? And we actually talked about the lean concepts with our team leaders. I don't know if you remember that, but we spent a couple of months talking to them about it in 2 different sessions, introducing the concept, and their homework was to find examples of quote unquote waste in each of their departments. And it was actually a really great exercise. I think it really hit home for me why you, for example, insist on everybody having, what can be sometimes a $400 scanner, because just, it requires a higher tech scanner, not, just a basic scanner. We just have a lot of paperwork from the government. So, those steps can add up. It's very good to keep that in mind.
And one of the concepts of lean was to try to make your data visual where possible, like use of like Kanban boards or charts or graphs or circle graphs and things like that, pie charts. One of the things that we do for each of our practice areas is that we can visually look on our Litify system. And I can see, 20% of my cases of, say, Social Security are at the first level, at the application level. And 30% of my cases are at level 2. So 50% of my cases are level 1 or level 2, which is not where I want them to be. I want them to be down at level 3 because that's where we usually can make the cash register ring. But so visually I can see that a lot of my cases are stuck early in the process, and we have to then reallocate resources. There's that word again.
Mm-hmm.
And put resources into level 1 and level 2 to get these cases moving so we can get them down to level 3 so we can make the cash register ring. Now, that's just a real simple visualization, but we do that across the firm in our different practice areas for the most part. And that all came from lean thinking. That all came from, thinking about a law firm as a data-driven entity, which I never used to think of it like that.
Yeah, because lean works usually with manufacturing facilities, right? And it was applying it to a service.
And this
business.
is the fallacy that lawyers get stuck into. Like we're a profession, we're not we have to run the business as a profession. I'm like, no, you're there to produce a result. Your value proposition is to produce a result, and the best and most profitable way to produce that result is to produce it as quickly as possible, at least in the contingency fee world that we're in, or I would argue a flat fee world as well. You hourly lawyers, we got to talk, people. We got to talk. All right. Number 3, rather.
Mm-hmm.
This is a classic, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Now, this book came out in 1937.
Wow.
Damn, pushing 100 years old, 90 years old.
I haven't read this one.
This has been around forever, and it is a foundational book about mindset. And what Napoleon Hill did is he interviewed hundreds and hundreds, it says 500 plus successful people to uncover their common traits and strategies. He interviewed the Rockefellers. He interviewed who are all the robber barons back in the day?
Yeah.
The Carnegies, all of these people that were just stupid rich, and tried to find common themes. And he had came up with 17 common themes. Now, some of which I thought were a little bit weird, and again, this was 90 years ago, so
okay.
There's I won't get into the ones that I thought were weird, but he got into some. The key ones that I thought they were all purpose driven.
Mm-hmm.
And they had this strong sense of persistency, like they just never gave up. They just kept going in spite of everything. That was a common theme. And he coined the term. One of the common themes was the theme of a mastermind. The term was coined in this book by Napoleon Hill. And I think it's common in other industries. It didn't become common in the legal industry and probably till like the last 10, 12, 15 years when I've really started hearing it. But the concept of masterminding is basically getting together with groups of other like-minded professionals and learning from each other. And it has now become a little cottage industry. It is now an actual thing where you can join organized mastermind groups. We were part of one last year. I would argue that Atticus is a modified form of a mastermind.
Okay.
It's not totally self-taught, but it is partially self-taught. But the concept, quite frankly, is to get people together. And one of the ways that it's done today is that you try to get people who are from different cities so they don't feel like they're competitors. So you can freely share information with people that aren't likely to be your competitors. Although these days, since we're all trying to practice on a national basis, I don't know how we're not all competitors, but friendly competitors. Mm-hmm. But that was the key concept within this particular book, was the mastermind concept. This is what had made a radical change in me. Because I read this, and then I first joined Atticus and Pilma, which are two different types of mastermind, in my opinion. I joined both of them in 2014-15, right in there.
Okay.
Anybody's listening to this podcast has heard what I have said about how joining those organizations 10, 12 years ago just radically changed the trajectory of my law firm and my practice and my life.
Yeah.
So, and I credit it all back to Think and Grow Rich.
And I definitely have seen the benefits of both organizations. You definitely invest in not only me, but your attorneys, as well as your intake and marketing managers. We're all going to Pilma coming up at the end of the month. Mm-hmm. And of course, I go with you to Atticus, and none of that is cheap. And
not at all.
it's definitely an investment in your people, which obviously is not a great. It's a great recruitment strategy and retention strategy, but also it takes us out of our comfort zones and allows us to think about our jobs in a much different way by talking to people who do what we do. So you've definitely passed that on to your team.
Okay, so number 4 on the list is another very popular book that's been around a long time, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which now, as of 2000, is out in the 30th anniversary edition.
Oh.
So an updated version. This is by Stephen Covey.
Have we done this one?
I'm not sure if we have. I reference it all the time.
Yeah, maybe that's why I feel like we have.
And the funny thing about this, I first saw this book sitting on my mother's shelf over 30 years ago. And I'm like, what is this? Because I was, my mom's a lawyer, and I was like a teenager at the time or something. And I was like, college kid, and she had all these law books, and then she had this book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, sitting there, and I'm like, this is not a law book. What is this book about? And I questioned her about it, and I started reading it, and it's turns out it's become a classic, and I like some of the habits, particularly begin with the end in mind. In other words, I've talked a lot on this podcast about figuring out where you want to be and reverse engineering it from that point. That's what this concept is. Begin with the end in mind. Where do we want to be in 10 years? All right. Where do we want to be in 5 years? Where do we want to be in 3 years? Where do we want to be in 1 year? How do we get there? What are the steps that we need to take to get to that goal, whatever that goal happens to be, whether it's personal or professional, whatever it happens to be. But you begin with the end in mind and then reverse engineer it from that point. That was one of 2 profound things in this book that really struck me. That changed my thought process totally about planning for the future. Just working backwards. It even started early in my career, because one of the first things I learned was, back when I used to try a bunch of jury cases, is like, I was kind of lost getting how do I start? And some seasoned lawyers said, you start with the end. Go draft your jury charge. Mm-hmm. The very end of your case is your jury charge. Go draft your jury charge and then work backwards from there. All right, now you have a jury charge. What do you want your closing statement to look like relative to all right, so now what evidence do you have to put on to get there?
Yeah.
Okay, what is your opening statement? Well, what do you want to talk about in Vorde? You just work backwards. Nobody ever taught me this in law school.
And I've heard you teach that to our our attorney group now.
Yeah,
They're not new attorneys, but I've definitely heard you teach that.
The second piece that was really profound about this book was the Eisenhower Matrix. This was the first time I'd ever seen it.
Okay.
And I'll try to draw out the Eisenhower Matrix verbally. But there's 4 quadrants in the Eisenhower Matrix. And then the top right of the quadrant is the important but not urgent. And then the top left of the quadrant is the important and urgent. And at the bottom right is the not important and not urgent. And then the bottom left is the urgent but not important. So in other words, the important things are above the line.
Yes.
And the thing he kept saying, Covey kept saying throughout the book is stay above the line. Only work on important things. And if you can, work on the important things that are not urgent, because those are the long-term things that really build out your structure and your organization, your systems and processes over time.
Yeah.
Okay? So try to stay above the line. Try to do the important but not urgent things first. Of course, you have to obviously deal with the important and urgent things like deadlines. You got to deal with that as well. But stay above the line and stop messing around. Stop wasting your time on unimportant things.
Yep. And this was another concept, the Eisenhower Matrix, that we taught to our team leads. And the way, obviously, you introduced the concept in one of our meetings. And then in the over the next month, the homework assignment was to kind of look at their weeks and figure out where these things, how they were spending their days and where they were falling in each quadrant. And I thought it was a great exercise for them to understand that some of these things that they just spent a lot of time on were neither important, not urgent, rather. And so it was a great way to teach the tool and actually have it apply to our team leads in the firm.
So the next 2 I'm going to do in combination, 5 and 6, Traction by Gino Wickman and Scaling Up by Verne Harnish. So my understanding from my reading on this is that Gino Wickman used to work for Verne Harnish with his Scaling Up program, which he called Gazelles, I believe.
Okay.
And then Gino Wickman broke off from him and wrote the book Traction. And if you read both Scaling Up and you read Traction, they are similar in some respects, but different in one key respect. But they're both operating systems to run your business. Now, we've spoken a lot about the EOS system, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which was developed by Gino Wickman, that came forth from his book Traction. And the whole idea is it breaks down a business into vision, people, data, issues, processes, and traction.
Yes. Those are the key components.
And these are the key components, the 6 key components, and this is what we do and what we work with in Traction.
Yep. And we've also talked about this one before.
Yes, and this has been one of our books. But it helps create a shared vision. It helps you keep the right people in the right seats and the right bus. The ultimate title is Traction. In other words, a cadence of accountability through the level 10 meetings that we have now instituted throughout the firm and different departments. I've had 3 level 10 meetings this week. So
You have 3 every week.
I have 3 every week. I just stick my nose in probably more places than I should. But and we chose to follow the Gino Wickman EOS Traction version. Okay. Now, which is a competitor to Verne Harnish's Scaling Up / Gazelles program. And I looked at both. I looked at both programs before we chose EOS, and here's what is different, and even Verne will say this, and he says it with a bit of a scowl, because I think there is definitely a rivalry, between
the systems,
between Verne Harnish, the master, and the, Gino Wickman, the prodigal son that kind of broke away. You go online and Google it. There's
I'm going to Google the drama.
There's a little bit of back and forth there between the 2. And Verne's criticism of the EOS Traction system is valid, and because the one thing that Traction / Gino Wickman left out is they don't talk about cash, Businesses do not run without cash. And scaling up kind of adds the added component of cash flow, profitability, which really is sort of just not even addressed in traction. So when I picked EOS, which lacks the cash component, that was a conscious decision, because what are we trying to accomplish in our running some sort of system with the firm? I'm trying to push vision throughout the whole firm. I'm trying to get the data throughout the whole firm. I'm trying to get the people. Do I need to get cash flow and the financials and all of the financial data? Do I need to push that down throughout the entire firm? I would say you don't.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I would say that is very top level stuff. In our firm, there's only 4 people that deal with that. And it's not my attorneys. It is me. It is you. It is our office manager. It is our accountant. Okay.
Yeah.
Those are the only people that deal with the money in the firm. And quite frankly, they're the only ones that really need to deal with the money side within the firm. It's not like everybody else doesn't know what we're doing. We do share the results, but they're not responsible for the results. And my take on it was that scaling up would be too complicated and too hard to implement for a firm of our size because of that sort of issue. And that has been one of the, not just my opinion, but I looked at a lot of writings on the subject of people comparing the two systems, and that tended to be the consensus. And quite frankly, the scaling up model might be more appropriate for larger firms than us.
Okay.
Firms with 200, 300, 400 people in them, where the EOS system was simpler and easier to implement, particularly in a smaller firm. But both books are great books. I think as a law firm owner, you should read both. And I think you should pay particular attention to the cash portion of scaling up, because there's a lot of, great concepts in there. There's only set 4 or 5 ways to affect your financial level. Either more revenue, less expenses, raise your prices, improve your velocity. And I think I'm missing one, but but he has several chapters on that, and I think it really was a good to read, but maybe not something you need to implement throughout the entire depth of your firm.
Yeah, I haven't read Scaling Up. I'll add that one. Well, not in its entirety. I have read select chapters as they apply to where we are with the firm. So Traction, of course, I love Traction because it's, got some 27 or something tools that we work through in our 2-year implementation, but they are all very simple tools, and somehow they're very effective. So what are your next books, Marc?
Well, we're going to skip to 11 on the list. We're going to do 11, 12, 13 real quick, then we're going to take a break. And then we'll come back. I'm going to group the last 4 books, which are the Atticus books by Marc Powers and Shawn McNalis.
Okay.
I think that would make logical sense for
All
our
righty.
structure. All right, so number 11, I put E-Myth Mastery, which is actually the subsequent book to E-Myth Revisited, which is actually the E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber is the popular book, the seminal book that he wrote on mastering systems, processes, and procedures.
Which we definitely have talked about.
Right. E-Myth Mastery actually was a little bit more tactical, and therefore I thought was more useful. And what it really drilled into me, and this is something I didn't quite understand. And I didn't understand how the book was structured until I came back and read it a second time. But I'd always conflated in my head marketing and intake. Like I always just referred collectively to the marketing and intake department.
Sales and marketing.
Sales and marketing. And a lot of people do that. They conflate the two things. They are really different systems and processes and procedures.
Absolutely.
Marketing is about generating interest. It's about getting people interested in what your offering is. What is your value proposition? Intake or sales is about now converting those interested people into actual clients. And those are two separate things. Those are two separate skill sets, and they deserve two separate sets of processes and procedures, two different budgets, two different managers. I used to have one person managing both sides of that coin.
That's not uncommon.
It's not uncommon. And this book, E-Myth Mastery, broke those two apart, and it really made sense to me for the first time why you had to look at these two departments in a different way. So that was why this book made the list, because it really reshaped my thinking on that particular issue that I never thought about. In the larger sense of the book, it's basically, talking about the concepts of E-Myth Mastery or E-Myth Revisited. And the basic concept of that is simply create the processes and systems and then hire people to run your processes and systems. And that is the crux of a successful business. So it's processes and systems first, then get the people to run the processes and systems. And then the people, if you lose somebody, it's not as painful if you have a solid process and system, because you're not losing their institutional knowledge, because the knowledge is in the process and system. Mm-hmm. Little bit cold way of looking at it, because we are in the people business, whereas I think Traction would put people first.
Yes.
And Gerber is a little bit assembly line, not a very much of a people person when you listen to him speak. But I still think the lesson is valid, that, we always talk about finding good people. We complain about turnover, about people leaving and having to retrain people all the time. And the basic concept of E-Myth is simply create systems.
And you won't have to worry about it.
And you don't have to worry about the people problem. Now,
sure.
I think that's kind of wishful thinking,
Yeah,
but it helps. It certainly helps. So that's why this one made the list. 4 disciplines of execution, the next one. Now, we just did a podcast on that several weeks ago. So obviously,
also one that made my list.
So this is actually written by Shawn Covey, Stephen Covey's son, and 2 other authors. So it's all in the family, still within the Franklin Covey system, which is another one of these systems out there. And the concept is great ideas don't matter if you can't execute, which brilliantly simple. How many brilliant people have you met that run around that have just hundreds of great ideas and never get anything done, never get anything accomplished?
Or never grow or
and never grow or just stagnate. Sometimes it's, I would rather have one good idea that I can execute on than 100 good ideas that I never execute on.
Right.
And the concept here that really struck was the whirlwind, because we talk about the whirlwind a lot. And the enemy of your wildly important goals is the whirlwind, that you get stuck in the daily grind, the daily minutia of just getting things done. And you can't ever step outside of the whirlwind to work on what he terms the wildly important goals. It was really, just that simple. The concept, that the life-changing part of that book was recognizing what the whirlwind was and knowing that you needed to figure out a way to get out of the whirlwind, at least some of the time, so you could work on big things.
Yeah, and I, have to relearn this one at different levels of my career, but it's definitely something that I feel like we almost preach again and again to our attorneys and to our management team. We have to bring up the whirlwind a lot. So it's a good reminder that we might need to look at that one again.
So the last one in this segment before we take a break is John Morgan. John Morgan's book, You Can't Teach Hungry, Creating the Multi-Million-Dollar Law Firm. So, what better person to try to emulate than the person who has literally the biggest plaintiff law firm in the world?
Yep.
In the world. And a lot of people dislike John Morgan for various reasons. I think a lot of it is jealousy and a lot of it is fear. They're afraid that John's going to move into their market or whatever. Well, why don't you learn something from him? Mm-hmm. He's an open book. I've talked about this on our podcast. He invited us to come to his law firm in Orlando and spend the day and learn about all of his processes and procedures and how he ran Litify.
Exactly.
And we did it, and we learned a ton. And how generous could you be? And he's written 2 books. This is how I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So he's written 2 books. You Can't Teach Hungry, and I think the other one, the sequel to it is You Can't Teach Vision, which was his second book, which, probably not as, probably said most of what he needed to say in the first book, but it was still worth the $19.95 to buy it and read it.
So why'd this make your list, Mark?
So he talked about building a client-centered practice. And, that really should resonate with everybody because we're in a service industry and we represent people, typically speaking, when they come to us at the worst point in their lives. And if you really want to be successful, and success, when I'm defining success, it's not just monetarily successful. If you want to be successful in the eyes of your client, which then makes you successful in the eyes of your peers, which then makes you successful in the eyes of your profession, and we all know Mark has an ego. Mark wants to be known as one of the best. I'll pay good money. I'll take less money in profit if I can be known as the best. But you have to start with that concept. You have to be client-centered, which is why our core purpose that we state over and over and over again at all of our staff meetings is our purpose is simply to improve the lives of our clients. We just keep it really simple, but that's our job. That's our purpose. So that was the first thing he talked about. You got to get to that. Of course, then he talks about marketing strategies. Obviously he spends millions, if maybe not with a B in front of it, maybe billions over time, wouldn't shock me, in marketing themselves. And he keeps it very simple, for the people is his slogan. Of course, then he comes up with his last billboard campaign, size matters.
Oh, gosh.
Which a lot of people roll their eyes at. Like, I thought that's funny.
I just did.
It's 2 words.
Yeah.
The key to marketing is keep it simple and keep it memorable, and everybody remembers it. It's brilliant. You may not like it, but it's freaking brilliant, and it works. So anyway, with that, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to wrap up with probably what's going to turn into sounding like a big commercial for Atticus, but we'll pimp out anybody. So anyway, we're going to cover the 4 Atticus books, which kind of come in a bundle and I think are foundational. I'm Marc Whitehead, a lawyer, entrepreneur, and business coach. Thanks so much for tuning into the Successful Barrister podcast. We have a blast creating it, and I hope you find it helpful. If our chats have sparked your interest, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me an email at marc@markwhitehead.com. That's Marc spelled with a C. Enjoying the Successful Barrister newsletter. Even better, let's hop on a call. I'd love to chat about how we can collaborate, share ideas, or just catch up. Atticus, or if you go online, atticusadvantage.com.
That is the correct
website. Moniker, because there are multiple companies out there called Atticus something or other, but atticusadvantage.com. So Atticus is a lawyer coaching company. I described it previously in the podcast as what I would refer to, at least in our program, as sort of quasi-mastermind. Use the word quasi because the traditional mastermind is taught, totally internally. Each person just basically tells everybody else what they're doing, and then everybody critiques you, and then they discuss it, and you hash out problems. In my version, a quasi-mastermind, which is what Atticus's quarterly program is, it's more of a modified version of that because there is a curriculum. And we cover a set curriculum with a set, moderator, instructor, I think we call him a practice advisor. But however, within that, there is plenty of room for us to share ideas, sort of like, he'll give us a key word about whatever, time management, and then we go, and then we all start sharing tips. So, and then he brings us back around. So I refer to that as sort of a quasi-mastermind. I don't think Atticus would actually describe it like that, but
yeah.
But you know what? I pay them a lot of money, so I can say what I want to say.
So the 4 books that you've selected, that they have several books that they've produced.
So these books represent what they call the 4 pillars. So they say the 4 pillars of having a great practice and a great life, which is the slogan of Atticus, is that number 1, you need to be able to manage your time. Number 2, you need to be able to manage your cash flow and profitability. Number 3, you need to be able to create great teams to work for you to execute on your vision. And number 4, you need to be a great marketer, a great rainmaker. Hence, the 4 books written by Shawn McNalis and Marc Powers, who were 2 of the 3 primary owners of Atticus. They've written a book on each topic. So I collectively look at each of these. This is how I'm getting under my rule of my 10 book limit, is I'm combining these 4 into one, because here's what happens. If you join Atticus, they send you these 4 books together.
Oh,
So
that's great.
we can sort of
Very handy.
look at them as a series. So the first one, Time Management for Attorneys, Attorney's Guide to De-stressing, or Decreasing Stress, rather, Eliminating Interruptions and Getting Home on Time. Again, this echoes a lot of the things that we've talked about, such as, the 4 disciplines of execution, the effective executive, and all of this. You can't manage yourself until you can manage your time. Time management, focus management, and it goes through all of the processes, the steps about time blocking, about prioritization, figuring out what's important, what you need to spend your time on, going back to that Eisenhower Matrix that we talked about, eliminating things that you don't need to be doing or delegating things that you don't need to be doing. It covers all that, but it covers it from the perspective of a lawyer. So there's lots of time management books and habit books out there, and a lot of them are great. There's Getting Things Done. I was thinking of all the time management books that I have sitting over there on my desk that I can't quite see from this distance, but this one is focused on attorneys.
And so this book actually predates my time with the firm, 2008. It was published in 2008.
Yes.
But since I have joined the firm and obviously become an Atticus client, I guess if that's the way you would call it, Atticus have started producing a planner, a spiral-bound planner,
Yes.
for all
Which
of their
I use
members.
religiously.
I do
My
not.
But you have your different version. You use one.
I do, exactly. And I think that really is a tool. So they take the book and the idea and the concepts, and they've actually given you a tool, the planner, to really help you focus on or apply the tools. And
Right.
I think that's a really, it's a good planner. It really is. It just didn't work for me.
The broader concept is, again, reverse engineering your plan. So, it starts with what your lifetime goals are. I'm still in the time management version. What are your 10-year goals, what are your 5-year goals, 3-year goals, 1-year goals, 90-day goals, so forth. And then you're reverse engineering it back into, now, how am I going to manage my time today to get to where I want to be in a week from now, in 90 days from now, in a year from now, and so forth and so forth. So you're reverse engineering down to the day. So every Sunday night, I use that planner to what do I need to get done this week? Well, the first thing it asks is, all right, well, what's on your 90-day plan? So you go back to your 90-day plan. I'll say, what can I knock out on my 90-day plan this week? And then I start planning my week accordingly.
Yeah.
So that's step number 1. You can't manage yourself. You can't manage practice if you can't manage your time. So number 1. Number 2, cash flow and profitability. You've got to understand the money side of the business. And what they're trying to explain in this book is how to create a financially healthy law firm, and basically to avoid the pitfalls of no cash flow, which really, really, really sucks.
Yes.
When you have to make payroll and you have no cash in the bank, that really, really, really sucks.
Well, it really sucks if you find out about it the day before payroll.
I
It's gonna
know.
get withdrawn.
And this has happened to me before. So they really break down the financial reporting. Try to do it in plain English. They talk about cash flow, not just profitability. And some people confuse profitability and cash flow.
Yeah.
You can be profitable and have no cash. And, that's when you go out of business. And, they talk about the financial systems that you need. So it's a good thing. And I think they really talk about things, they kind of break it down, difference between contingency fee law firms and hourly firms and flat fee firms, because they all have different cash flow models. So they really apply the concepts of cash flow, which are one of the things that I mentioned in Scaling Up that I really liked about the book Scaling Up, is it had this whole section on cash and cash flow. But basically, Shawn and Marc have pulled those concepts over as they relate specifically to the three business models that you typically see within law firms. So,
Yeah, we spent some time with the cash flow, like a lot of time last year in Atticus on the cash flow. They brought it out and kind of updated the tool, and it was very helpful for us, I think.
yeah, a lot of it about rates, about realization, about, again, about time on desk that we've mentioned before, speed of collections, all of that fun stuff, which can bog some people down. But I think they've simplified the concepts, for us stupid lawyers. So,
I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about the next book, Marc.
So the next one is called Hire Slow, Fire Fast, a lawyer's guide, fire fast, mind you, a lawyer's guide to building a high performance team. So the third pillar and the four pillars within Atticus are creating a high performing team, what I would call an all-star team. Nobody can do it all yourself. And if you really want to grow and you really want to expand your practice, you have to create these teams of people who can really perform, and quite frankly, perform independently without you, ideally. Otherwise, you become the choke point in the firm. If everything has to come through you, you become a massive choke point. The firm cannot grow past your capacity. Versus, say, for where we are now, we have 75 some odd employees and divided into numerous different teams that each perform specific types of functions within the firm, all of which create cash flow. Mm-hmm. You can't have cash flow if you don't have an effective team, and hopefully it's not a team of one. That would burn you out real fast.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's all about creating effective teams, hiring practices, training practices, sadly, sometimes firing practices, about thinking of your team as an investment, not an expense.
No, I like that.
Thinking of your teams as profit centers. Mm-hmm. One of the concepts that we really have implemented, I would say one of the key things is, we look at our teams as profit centers and we know how to measure them. Our standard is they need to, as a team, they need to be producing 3 times what they cost me. So if they cost me, I'm going to say, if one section costs me $1 million a year in salaries and expenses, then they need to be producing $3 million a year in revenue. 3 to 1, whatever it is, whatever that base number is. It's a good metric to gauge your success by. If you can do 4 to 1, even better, great. But 3 to 1 is sort of the number that you're looking for at a minimum. That's the minimum number you're looking for. And that's a lot of what kind of opened my eyes in this book, was that
the 3 to 1,
that 3 to 1 concept. And I think that's kind of a combination of cash flow and hire and fire slow. I'm maybe melding 2 concepts within those 2 books, but you and I talk about the 3 to 1 all the time. We post that in level 10 meetings. What's been our ratio? What's been our labor to revenue ratio lately? So the last one, and possibly the most important one, how good attorneys become great rainmakers, a breakthrough referral marketing process. And it focuses on referral marketing, which is different from advertising. Okay, so the key element, the key concept is it doesn't matter how great a lawyer you are or how great a law firm you are. If you don't have any clients to represent, it's all kind of pointless.
right?
You got to have clients. And this is where most lawyers focus when they think. This is why our ratings for marketing podcasts tend to be higher. You got to bring in clients, and good clients. And so I will say that this book is primarily about referral marketing. Okay. It gives you what they call the 5 habits and the 21 tools. Now, they just rewrote this book last year. So originally it was written when?
2009.
2009. And that was a little dated, and I think they realized it was a little dated. Probably still mentioned Yellow Pages or something stupid like that. So they rewrote it in 2024. So there's a new, make sure you get the 2024 version if you're going to get this. But it breaks it down into the 5 habits and the 21 tools that you use to develop a referral marketing system, i.e. referrals from other attorneys, other professionals, referrals from your clients, those high return on investment activities as opposed to advertising, say TV, radio, stuff like that, which tend to be volume plays, but not the greatest returns on your investment. So they're focusing on the nuts and bolts of it, the referral marketing side. And lots of great ideas in there. A few nuggets that I pull out. The thank you system. Always say thank you when you get a referral, even if you don't take it. And we embed that here. We gift. We have a very large gifting budget.
Very large.
Every month, we send out gifts to attorneys who've referred us business. Now, we can't necessarily do that to clients because that violates a few disciplinary rules, but we can certainly give gifts to lawyers, okay? And we do that very consistently, and, it works. We also send out thank you notes, gifts, anytime somebody does anything positive for us. I probably need to do a little bit better job of that. Here's an idea I had. I frequently see my name get dropped in social media because there's lots of lawyer chat boards that we're on, and somebody will say, hey, anybody know a disability lawyer? And I'll have 10 people will sit there and drop my name. I don't ever say a word. I don't jump in and say, hey, me.
Right.
I just sit back there and listen and see all of my friends jump in and drop my name, which I think is actually more effective. One thing I think I need to do, I need to start thanking those people for dropping my name.
Yeah.
In a social, because I see it, and I keep thinking about it. I keep thinking I need to do that. And it was just this idea I had the other day, because it just literally happened yesterday again. We have a little group called Texas Lawyers Lounge, and it's got hundreds, maybe thousands of lawyers in it. And my name got dropped, and boom, I should send that person a thank you note.
Absolutely. We'll make a note to do so.
We need to make a point of that. Put that on a to-do list. But the point is there's a number of different ways you can market yourself. But referral marketing is the cheapest form of marketing out there. However, it's going to require a little bit of effort and a little bit of ingenuity on your part. And that's the point of the 5 habits and 21 tools of the book. And I just think it's foundational.
Okay.
So given all that, so that's it. That's my list of 10/14 books, my top books. I will say I have a lot of others that make that just right next cut. And it was difficult to make the choice. I didn't put in Good to Great.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite books. And I thought about that, and I struggled with not putting Good to Great in there, but it was just, it's right there. But I was told 10.
So I can tell you, I really took that to heart. These are great books, Mark. I really like that you started with Outlive and just talked about how important quality of life is.
So all I would say is I think the most successful people out there are big readers. I've very seldom seen a successful person out there that wasn't a big reader, and let's not talk about the person in the White House. I don't know how he did it, but for most of us in the world, there are so many resources out there, so many ways to consume really great material. I think this is, that's just my parting advice to end this podcast is get out there and find some good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think that our listeners should let us know which book list is better.
This is it. I want so my email is marc@markwhitehead.com. Marc is spelled with a C. Send me your list.
Oh, well, I was going to ask them to let us know which list was better, mine or yours.
Now you're.
So my email is Diana@markwhitehead, Diana 1N. Let us know which list is better and why. So
okay. But then tell us what books you like, because if you've got some books that I haven't read yet, I want to read them.
Same. Absolutely.
All right. So with that, we're getting the high sign that we're out of time. So I want to thank everybody for listening to the Successful Barrister podcast, where legal legends are made. I'm Marc.
And I'm Diana.
And together we're the dynamic duo of law. So remember to rate and review us. And if you've enjoyed this, tell your friends. Let's grow the listenership. And get out there and give us some 5-star reviews. We would really love to build up our 5 stars. make sure to visit our website at successfulbarrister.com. And make sure to visit our sponsor, Marc Whitehead & Associates, a national disability law firm, at disabilitydenials.com. And with that, we're out of here.
Bye.